The empire had a story to tell about the creation and purpose of the world and of human life. It's a story of might makes right. It's a story of winners and losers. It's a story of some people having more than enough, but a whole lot of people having hardly enough at all to survive. It was a story of deprivation and endless toil for the masses and great wealth for the elite few. The Bible also had a story to tell about the creation and purpose of the world and the creation and purpose of human beings. In the Bible story, the world is created in abundant life, teeming with life, and human beings are created, male and female, in the very image of God to be kings and queens in the universe, and to govern in the world as God governs in the universe, with joy and generosity and delight. The world of empire is a world where the many suffer and the few prosper. And not only does the empire say that that's just the way the world is, the empire also says, through their creation story, that this is the way the gods intended the world to be. So this inequality is in fact a divine mandate to question this system where some have much and many have few, is to question the very order that the gods have set in the universe. The Bible's creation story has a completely different view. In the view of the Bible, there is more than enough for everyone to survive and to thrive. Now, this understanding of the fundamental abundance of the world is underlined again for us in the Bible's second Sabbath story, which comes to us after the Israelites have escaped from Pharaoh in Egypt and have been miraculously saved at the sea. In Exodus 16, when they've crossed the sea and they now find themselves in the wilderness, the Israelites begin to fear. They begin to grumble against Moses and against God who brought them out of Egypt. Chapter 16, verse 3 of Exodus. The Israelites said to Moses and Aaron, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. You've brought us out into this wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I am going to rain bread from heaven for you. Each day the people will go out and gather enough for that day." So Moses and Aaron called the Israelites together, and they said, "Behold, God is about to provide food for you." In the evening, quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp, and when the dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What's that?" In Hebrew, the words are manhu. What's that? It's a pun on the word manna. For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "This is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you needs, an omer to a person, according to the number of people, all providing for those in their own tents." The Israelites did so. But you know, there was a strange characteristic of this manna. When the Israelites went out to gather, Some gathered more, some gathered less, but when they measured it with an omer, those who had gathered much had nothing in excess, and those who had gathered little had no shortage. They each gathered just as much as each one needed. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over until morning." But they didn't listen to Moses. Some left part of it until morning, and it bred worms and became foul. Morning by morning they gathered it, as much as each one needed. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. And on the 6th day, they gathered twice as much food, 2 omers apiece. And when the leaders of Israel came to Moses and asked him, he said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a solemn day of rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you want to bake, boil what you want to boil, and all that's left over put aside to keep until morning." So they put it aside until morning, as Moses commanded, and it did not become foul, and there were no worms in it. And Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 days you will gather it, but on the 7th day, which is Sabbath, there will be none." The miraculous thing about Sabbath is not just that God provided for Israel in the wilderness, but that each person went out and gathered as much as they could, and people had different abilities to gather and collect the wealth to them. But when they got back to their own households, everybody had exactly what they needed. Nobody in the community suffered deprivation, and nobody enjoyed excess. In this Sabbath world envisioned by Genesis 1 and Exodus 16, there is always enough for everybody. Sure, there are different talents. People are able to produce more, to gather more. But in the end, everybody in the community should have and does have just what they need in order to survive. Now, this attitude of abundant life for all, of everybody having enough to survive, is reflected in the biblical economic ethic that we see in a number of biblical passages. Ancient Israel was based on a household economy. Within every household, every member of the family worked to support the long-term survival of the household. Men, women, children, they all had different functions within the household, but everybody worked for the survival of the household, and nobody within the household suffered deprivation. Now, this household ethic applied even outside the household, in the village, in the town, in the region. The economic system of Israel was based on mutual support. The Israelites were particularly concerned about those households that were vulnerable, households where the senior male had died, households that consisted of widows and fatherless children. And so throughout biblical tradition, there are laws that are enacted in order to ensure the survival of these vulnerable households in the community. Laws like the law of gleaning, where when you plant a crop and the crop comes in at harvest time, you can go through and harvest your crop, but you can't harvest all of it. You have to leave some of it. So those vulnerable households, the poor, the widow, the orphan, the resident alien, so they can come through your fields and they can glean the leftover in the field. So gleaning is one of the laws of mutual support that was put into place to guarantee that the larger household of Israel would survive even in difficult times. There were laws concerning usury, that is, the charging of interest on loans. In ancient Israel, loans were given in order to allow people to survive. These were subsistence loans. These were not loans that you take out to buy some luxury good or to put in a new carport or buy an automobile. These were loans that were given so people could survive difficult times when they had bad crop years and they had to borrow from neighbors who were better off. Biblical tradition forbids Israelites from charging interest on those subsistence loans. You loan people what they need in order to survive, and then they pay you back when they're able. There are laws concerning the humane treatment of people who are in debt to you. There are laws concerning the kinds of collateral you can take. You can't take collateral on a loan, collateral of something that somebody needs to survive. So, for example, you can't take the upper millstone of a mill because it's needed in order to grind the food, to grind the grain to make the bread for the people to survive. If you take somebody's cloak as collateral on a loan, you have to give it back to them every night so they can pull it over themselves as a blanket and be warm in the evening. So there are laws of gleaning, there are laws regarding debt, there are laws regarding the forgiveness of debt, the forgiveness of debt slavery. Sometimes people put their own labor up as collateral on a loan. But there was a maximum amount of interest that you could charge. They could come into your household as a debt slave only for 6 years. In the 7th year, no matter how much they owed you, you had to set them free. And you set them free by giving them lots of the wealth that had been produced during their tenure in your household. So there are all kinds of rules that govern the well-being of vulnerable households within the broader community of Israel. Now, this household-based, kinship-based system of mutual support was critical in ancient Israel. But what if you found yourself having to leave your area of household support? What if you, because of famine or drought or war or pestilence or overpopulation or climate change, what if you had to migrate, you had to immigrate to some other place? What if you found yourself cut off from your kinship system of mutual economic support? Well, that's where the ancient rules of hospitality come into play. When people are on the move, when they're cut off from their sources of economic support.